And most successful companies share one thing: they develop their people. The Success Launch Point makes it simple with on-demand courses, live coaching, and a thriving professional community. Your team will gain confidence, sharpen skills, and deliver more value, while staying loyal to the company that invests in them. To take your workforce to the next level, check out modernobserver.com/launchpoint.
We are still and again lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm very blessed to be with two of my favorite people on the planet, Jeremias, who is my normal co-anchor, and also a young man who I've really grown to appreciate a whole lot, probably more than you'll ever know, Mr. Austin Jacob. And I think with that introduction, our goal every week is to kind of like have conversations that somehow have at least one big toe in the domain of empowerment. And if we're successful in doing that, you're going to know, and I'm taking all of my direction here, what we're talking about, where we're going with the conversation, to the extent that it ever needs guiding, because it really doesn't with these wonderful people. I'm listening to your future comments and how it's striking you. And I can tell you one thing: if I'm having goosebumps or some type of fire in my belly during the course of this next hour, I got a feeling it'll be working good for all three of us, and probably for all of you who are listening. So after that extended introduction, and welcome to everyone, kind of a rainy day here in Connecticut today. And, I just keep getting this smattering of a Beatles song from the White Album. Obladi, oblada, life goes on, brah. Lala, how the life goes on. And what happens in a lifetime sometimes can flash before your eyes when you get news of some major thing happening. And I do want to talk about the energy in the world right now, and just check in with both you, Jan, and you, Austin. Are you feeling any kind of a shift in the energy that we've been sort of living with and under for the last month or so? Are you feeling any, like there's a relief valve being set off somewhere, that maybe enough's enough and maybe we can get back to life as normal again? What are you feeling? Let's put it that way.
Do you want to go ahead, Jan?
Mm-mm.
When I think of this and shifts, I feel them happening constantly. And I also see that there's a tendency, not just for myself, but just maybe how culture has impressed upon me, that we like to anticipate a change, even if we show resistance towards it. And so when you're asking, are you feeling the shift? It sounds like a relative question, but I get it's also can be very universally applied. So the quick answer would be yes, but I don't think that really satisfies what you're really asked in a shift question like that.
I think what we can do is maybe we can distinguish what we mean by that shift. All of us have these really cool energy detectors. We've got our mind, we've got our heart, and we've got our gut. A man who I really respected said, those are our three compasses. Those are our three BS detectors. They do a great job of letting us know if we're really in a situation where things are progressing, staying the same, or getting worse. And to a large degree, it also lets us know at a very primal level, the flight and fight, kind of response to things. They're kind of in control of those non-verbal, non-thought kind of reactions to the world. So the neat part of it is that's a lovely tone. I like that. It sounds magical almost. I keep waiting to see Tinkerbells flying across the screen here. But what an appropriate time, we're talking about a shift, and this is a good time to laugh. Have you ever noticed that, like, the best time to laugh is always now? And I know, Austin, from our time together, laughing is one of the things that you love to do. Why to lie?
Oh, yes. It's that or crying. No, I'm just kidding. That was made for a joke.
Yes. And that's okay. When I say something, you have the freedom to do anything you want to with it. That's the gift of us being together.
If I may jump back on that question, since we kind of understand we got to pick a shift. So what I'd say that's contemporary in my observation is a wide disclosure of technological advancements. That might be how it's being presented. Oh, look at this possibility over here. You should listen to me and hear. Another approach you could say to this is AI is becoming more mainstream, but in a if I could lessen that statement, I think it's disclosure of this kind of information, not necessarily a technological shift, but I think as more big names are starting to join in spreading some information, I see a lot of shifts in that in other people. So maybe that'll help the next question.
Absolutely. So from a technology standpoint, no one ever even talks about paradigm shifts anymore because it just happened again. We used to have this thing called mega trends. Jan and I are both, we've been enough trips around the sun to remember when that was what we called emergent technologies and what it would be doing to change the planet. And more often than not, it came at the end of a decade or when we're starting to go into a new 10-year cycle. And then the soothsayers would predict what that would look like from a financial standpoint globally and what that would mean at a local and a national basis here in the United States. But more than anything, they were saying there are some technologies that are coming along you should pay attention to because, for instance, nobody saw Amazon happening. And if you go further, nobody saw Facebook happening. And the folks that at Google almost sold to Facebook. And that never would have happened. We'd never have Google, as one of the largest technology platforms in the world. But along the same lines, there have been major shifts in terms of religion, culture migration. The United States complexion has changed so much from being a so-called melting pot back in the last century to now being what I think David Dinkins referred to as being a mosaic, which, was intended to honor the uniqueness of all people culturally and their inherent need to identify and continue that identification, through time and into the future. Well, if you look at the melting pot philosophy, that's kind of what always happened anyway. There's always been an Irish Day and celebrations, for St. Patrick's and all that. And the Italians were always really big on all of the holy days and Columbus Day. And now we're at the point where people aren't talking about mosaics anymore. From a cultural standpoint, I'm not really sure how we would describe our culture in the United States in 2025 to a, an alien. Of course, they're not coming here anymore. I mean, the word on the street is that the aliens have completely given up on us.
I don't think that's how that works, but I would love to get in a talk about that too. If I might though, I feel I can upgrade the answer now that we're trimming out some of this fat. I think that the world is in a knowing that this shift that gets talked about is pattern recognized in multiple ways, whether if you look at research in Mandela effect and just overlaying realities and things of that nature. Um, what I see is that this might be a bold statement, but I'm prepared to make it. I think we are all looking for more people to step up to what is this shift? How do we go forward in it? Because what I'm seeing, speaking solely for myself, is things are ready to come down, but not just come down because there is so much beauty that comes out of it. And it's who are the people or systems or path, direction, how we get into that. That's that shift that everyone might be referring to or waiting on. I think some people only know to pose it, that shift, and talk about it because they almost, myself included, in different areas, not everything, that, well, where do I go? What does this mean for me? What's coming? Remember in the beginning, we were looking forward. What is ahead? Well, equally, we have to understand where we are now. And you just got done saying that a moment ago, that in an interesting way, that's a very valid question. Where are we right now? What is our culture? Where's the reference point to understand my culture? And this shift. Dan was getting ready to go with it.
No, I mean, I haven't had, I was thinking more along. So a few things that the other big thing that I think of was the Human Genome Project, which I think changed a lot of the whole kind of idea of disease and genetics and disease and susceptibility and, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was a huge transition coming from the more scientific world of sequencing the whole human genome and what that meant for people. So I think of that in regard to my background as being sort of this pivotal finding or pivotal shift in the way people view disease and medicine and individuality on a more genetic type level. To one of the things Bill said about, the melting pot. I think, I look at most of us are, our parents were immigrants at some point or another.
Right.
And I think the difference was they might have celebrated, but it was really very private in what they didn't do a lot of I mean, my grandparents came over and my grandfather would not let them speak German in the house. He was like, we're in America now, we speak English.
Mm.
And so my mother spoke German because she was born there, but my aunt and uncle don't really speak German, or very little. And so it was a very different kind of time where people kind of depending on when they came over and how, where they had come from and under what circumstances they had emigrated, that kind of melting pot was a very different thing. And they really felt like they came in thinking, okay, well, I'm not German, I'm American now, leaving that kind of in some way, their roots behind in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think of the whole idea of so much of what Austin was just saying was this feeling of, I feel a lot of internal shifts. And I think that everything going on outside is kind of making me question a lot of things on the inside.
Mhm.
Things I believed, things that I took for granted. Ideas that I had about the way, about people, the way the world functioned, the way the universe functioned. And so I think whenever you have anything that kind of shakes everything up, to me, that's what happens. It's almost like you have to go through a whole system of recalibration of yourself, of getting in touch with yourself, of saying, okay, well, who am I now? And knowing what is constant within that, what never changes.
Right.
And then what does, like, what changes that's not really that important, and kind of figuring out who you are in that space or in the space of the world.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're saying. And I guess the big conundrum is which changes are important
That's right.
and to whom are they important? I mean, there's a lot of changes going on that other people around me are kind of interested in and upset by and all the rest of it. And I'm just like, why don't we wait until something actually happens? We've got a pretty good track record for cleaning messes up after something occurs, but I just don't understand, why there's so much energy of people forecasting, the bad result that's going to come if the change that they're talking about occurs. And I wonder how much time is being lost by them, the satisfaction, their self-expression and joy, and what are they trading all of that good stuff for?
Well, to your point, Bill, I think people have always done that. I mean, it's kind of like, all you have to do is, like, there's a storm coming, and all of a sudden, like, you listen and it's like going to be the storm of the century. And everybody does, like, there's like a mad rush on the stores to go and buy stuff, because what happens if you lose power and whatever. And I think to me, it has to do with, let's say, advertising and news and, and all that kind of stuff, and money. And so all of a sudden it's like creating a panic when nothing has really happened yet, and
And it's conversational in nature as opposed to an occurrence or a physical change in the world.
yeah. And then, I had something happen the other day. It was like nothing happened, but I was sort of in my mind, I had to do something that, in general, makes me anxious. And I got up in the morning and I thought to myself, I have to handle this every year because it's an annual thing that I have to renew. I have to handle this every year. And so far, historically, I've done it. So why am I panicking, or why am I going through this stuff at the moment? Because every year, they ask me for what they need and I end up getting it to them or whatever. So,
Yeah.
like, relax. But I think that first of all, the nature of human beings is to do that to some extent. And I think our society has kind of created that mindset of that. It's almost like putting everybody in a panic, uh, you know, on a,
Yeah.
whether on a daily basis.
Well, I love what you're saying. I absolutely, you personified so well. And yeah, Bill, I mean, isn't that what people do? That's kind of like, what our training up until now. I'm mindful of the quote, and I'm not sure if it was Will Rogers or Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, who said, "I have experienced many terrible things in my life, a few of which actually happened."
Right, exactly.
And if you stop and think about it, we just have a lot better tools for amplifying, focusing on different things that have never been available before. And I think as human beings who are, we're not satisfied with just getting information. We kind of like to play with it, don't we? We get some input and now we try to figure out what's that mean? And, we're using our critical thinking skills or whatever training is there that we've convinced ourselves keeps us going and makes us smarter, better, faster human beings. And again, how much are we trading away that being an intelligent Nostradamus predicting the future for living in a current world that's really full of joy and self-expression? I think those two things right there feed the soul. They feed your chi, keep the energy going in a very good direction. So how do we get out of that loop? And how do we predict a paradigm shift, Austin, that will take us into that next stage where humanity just decides to don't worry, be happy, or something else?
I love that you posed the question to me like the answer is going to be obvious. No, the answer is obvious and it's simple. Don't you? Why don't you know it already, Bill? I'm just fooling you. Some of the things I wrote down here to help anchor in my own thoughts going through um, relative quantum mechanics. And I might not, I haven't articulated this before, but there's a theory that's in my mind or the mind about shifts in general. And no coincidence, that's the topic. And if you approach the topic of shifts through a frame of relative quantum mechanics, there's this theory in mind that I've entertained a couple of times where, and actually this would be a great segue into like extraterrestrial and how people view channeling and things like that. But the theory is, I'm trying to in real time articulate it. What one person relates as a shift, whether internal or vocalized, or the point that is called shift never actually changes. In other words, imagine parallel within a parallel. You've heard dream within a dream within dream, or layer within a layer with layer. Sometimes I've tuned into, well, yeah, we'll just call it a theory for now, that what is happening is constantly almost projecting outside. And it looks, it feels, it sounds like all kinds of things. Often we call this separation. And I think the greatest shift that's ever going to happen is going to happen at a point. And it starts from whoever's claiming that shit, whoever or whatever. In other words, it's singular. It's one by one, but it's also all at once. So this grand shift, I catch me in 100 years. It's gonna continue and continue, and that's not coming from Austin. That's coming from all the information that's available. It's not new information, right? The only thing I can entertain in terms of you throwing that question at me is, it's an internal thing, and it happens now. It's not a then.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, and the internal is both individual and collective. There's this shared nonverbalness about energy that we can meet complete strangers, not even speak the same language, and communicate just with facial expressions. And part of that is learned communications, that in any language, the fundamentals are there. They have different words for them, and they may have distinctions within distinctions, but at a general level. I mean, coming from the Crosby, the Wooden Ships song back in the day, if you smile at me, I'll understand, because that's something everybody everywhere does in the same way. Beyond that, if we really think about it, no matter how sophisticated we are, even if we have two geniuses speaking to each other in front of a stadium of 10,000 people trying to communicate, it's only just a heightened version of people smiling at each other or frowning at each other. Unless they're in a conspiracy to co-create something new. And when you're in that space and you are constantly grasping at the skinny branches out at the edge of what, and we can say it this way, there are things in the world that are sayable, and they're knowable now. They're part of the body of knowledge that's already here. And then there are some things that are unknowable, the things we don't know. And that we don't know them gives us no access to it at all until we invent. And then they are first sayable before they're knowable. That's just that prediction of some kind of an important change or shift for human beings. And when we consider that the world operates more like two people who are deaf mutes bumping into each other than folks that sit down and make an agreement that they're going to cooperate and get things done in a powerful way, and learn how to dance with each other, when that's actually showing up in the world, it is something beautiful to behold. No force, no resistance, and miracles occur. And I want to say that in my lifetime, when I've observed people who were really making things happen, if you stop and think about it, Elon Musk did so much more when people didn't know who he was.
Mm.
The man was generating, 5 different new industries 15, 18 years ago in his mind, in his speaking with people around him. Nobody even knew that he had anything to do with PayPal, and that's where he got his first big slug of money from. So the ones that are the loudest in pronouncing, themselves to the world, I don't know that they're the ones that are actually creating a cooperative environment, or that they're actually fostering some sort of a group transformation, if you will. I think more often than not, it seems like it's the opposite to me. So that's part of the energy ebb and flow, the yin and the yang, the really good stuff offset by what seems to be an equal amount of not so good stuff. Can you hear that?
I can.
I am so pleased with myself. That clock my daughter and I bought for my wife in the year 2000. And it takes some management. It only will run for about 18 hours without pulling the weights all the way back to the top. But I am so rewarded. I've got 3, my watch, the grandfather clock, who I think that was the low tone that you might have heard in the background, and then that wonderful music box sound, with the beep boop, beep boop.
So once in a
Really powerful things. I'll make it quick. You were touching on the loudest voice or the biggest voice. It would make sense that, you know, um, I want to try and bring it contemporary. Right now, AI is getting big named people talking about it. And I thought to myself, how interesting. Should I participate and know what other people are knowing? And just like you were saying, in a way, if you step back, you realize the loudest things would also mean that it's the most known. Why is it the most? To me, I ask more questions.
I wonder why, Austin. That's your bent in life, isn't it? To want to know more than what you're hearing. Like who's the man behind the curtain?
Interesting. I would actually say that it's more about the language, blending the separation. Like you actually said something about saying and then knowing, or you said knowable before sayable. And it's interesting because I kind of think and revert to that where, not that I'm saying I know everything, but I almost like how can I use what's available to me to describe whatever that knowable is? It could be consensus. It could be a moment. It could be a discussion. It could be anything. Nonetheless, I would say the opposite too.
Well, I mean, that's what science depends on, isn't it? It's like it depends on agreement, first of all. Because in the early days of any new theory, theorem, postulation, hypothesis, all that stuff at the beginning, all the work goes into writing it in language that can be communicated to other smart people. And then once it's tossed out into the world, that's when the other minds start to take over. And what they do with it, independent from the person who had the first thought and gave it up to the community or the culture, is usually far better than the initial idea that came from the person who penned it.
I would agree with that. I would also say that, like, as far back as you can go, how can we speculate that is absolute truth, because anything that's recorded, vocalized, it's merely a projection of the truth. It might be true in that moment. It might be even true for the person expressing it. But the truth is not something that can be relayed to another. That's that knowable before. Go ahead.
No, I was actually just agreeing with you. And the notion that there is a truth. That is, I think, one of the hardest proof tables on the planet to distill something down to, through a lot of analysis, that it is the truth or it's not. Especially today, we had a lot clearer idea of just the two words right and wrong years ago, right? Now we have this distinction, which I've heard called your truth or my truth. What's happening to our language, in other words? Is it meant to clarify or is it meant to fog? Is it meant to gain control? Is it meant to free people up? I'm not sure.
I think it's a tool. It's a beautiful tool. Um, Now I say that from like a higher viewpoint of it, because in a lot of moments of my life, I haven't carried that belief. Oh, language is here to help me. It's here to help me connect. It's here to, all the things that I was seeing use for it didn't seem to line up.
Right.
But I think the highest truth I could project here would be it's a tool. It's a tool, and it can be used to, like a knife, to make a great meal or stab your friend in the back.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder if it's undergone the same kind of misuse as the word science has in the last 10 or 15 years. Listen to the science. Only after we find out that the people who were speaking the so-called science had something other than a scientific motive in what they were saying. And it's like that old, I have a friend who used to be a diamond trader down on Canal Street. And he always said, Bill, he said, if ever anyone tells you to trust them, don't you dare do it.
I don't know why it's coming through to think of my electrical experience, but I think of coherence, and a lot of great coordination happens when there's coherence, not necessarily the same language being used, but there's how do I want to, what is the word I want to use? There's substance to the communication going on because there's coherence. And I just to follow through and kind of give maybe some more context, coherence could be everyone in the room is in agreement something needs to get done. Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe the people over here are speaking a completely different language, culture wise, and maybe the people who are speaking the same language, there's still dissonance. So coherence, I think, maybe nullifies project posing that question, because that was the because.
Well, another word I think that fits into what you're saying is resonance.
That's what I was thinking of, was resonance.
Yeah. It's like if you pluck a guitar string in a room full of guitars, the ones that are tuned exactly the same way. Is that train that always goes through right about now? I love that. I like that some things are predictable and constant, right? So, the vibration of other guitar strings tells you that they're tuned to the same frequency. What do you think, Jan?
I mean, yeah, there were a few points. So one is going back to, you were talking about communication, and I'm thinking, smile or whatever. That is not limited to. I mean, been found in many, that was found in primates by Jane Goodall. That's beings. Beings in general have a way to communicate that's beyond languaging. And that's to me, what we now lack as human beings. We've kind of gone overly in the opposite direction where we rely on our heads too much.
Yeah.
And then Austin used the word coherence, and I think of heart math, which is heart coherence,
Yes.
which is basically, where the synchronicity of, basically two hearts that come together. And that has nothing to do with language.
Right.
That has to do purely with energy, and being energetically on the same space with someone and being able to breathe with them. And then all of a sudden language, is in so many ways. And if we could start, like, even no matter the conversation, if we go into something sort of with that frame, then we've gotten rid of like a lot of I want to say the noise. And then, you know, then possibility can happen. Then possibility that, things can change. When two people go in with their own, and I want to say, not saying a story in a bad way, but go in sort of preoccupied with their own story, there's no room for coherence. It's almost like, well, here I am and I've put up this wall, and here I am and I've put up this wall, and the energy is going to get blocked because it's not going to be able to travel through. Um, and I think that, yeah, certain things, coming from my background, and you talk science, I mean, so much of it is governed by, sad to say, who's going to make money. So much of it is determined by who sponsored and paid for the research.
Right.
And, and then the whole 9 yards, having worked off of grants and the whole bit for 24 years, what's going to get funded, the fact that you're reviewed by peers. And if those peers, like, basically, if you're not in the in crowd,
Yeah.
you get denied. It doesn't matter.
Look at what happened to Copernicus and Galileo.
Right. I mean, that's just, it's so, it's human beings making these decisions. It's not, and with their own agendas. So, and their own sort of ideas. So, not in a negative way. I do agree with you that, usually if somebody created the idea, it's the people that use the research going forward, because research is ongoing. You take what somebody else found and you prove it again, or you take that a step further and say, okay, well, if I change this about it, what happens? Or if I'm working on this population of people, does it apply? It's always evolving. It's not stagnant. That's just the nature of science.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting kind of a correlation to what used to happen back in the old days when the church was in charge of things. But there are groups of people that meet on an annual basis. These are the top 1,000 value people on the earth. For 40 years, they've all agreed there are too many people. They just haven't figured out what exactly to do, about that. And instead of getting to a zero population growth, which was their goal probably in the 1970s or 1980s, it's the absolute opposite has happened, where we've gone from maybe 4.5 billion people, to now pushing 8.5 billion people. So 15, 20 years ago, they decided they were going to do something different. And they decided that if they could get everyone on the planet at an early age, DNA-wise, to register, and they know where they are, they would be able to at least keep track of them and make changes from on high as necessary, financially. And then they decided, now we have the technology to be able to go with digital currency. That's even better still, because now we've got the situation where the international government the one that none of us know about, can make changes to pretty much anything that they want to. And the more they want to track our movements, if you've ever been to the UK in the last 25 years, what you start to realize is there's absolutely no place for them to hide, for any human being to hide, down to actually monitoring the Internet of Things to be able to see into people's homes if they want to do it. Now, they don't have a good reason for doing it all the time, and it's not a cost-effective approach to take, but they are also gathering all of this information in a database so that surreptitiously later on, if there's a reason to go after somebody, they've got a whole lot of information accumulated. Now, to a larger degree, it's available in other countries as well. If you ever look and see what's going on in China, it's like that on steroids. The United States, they will not tell us that that's going on, but there are people who are, basically saying we're on that track, like it or not. Now, inside of all of that, what do people get out of having us disagree with each other and have these skirmishes over politics, religion, finance? There seems to be always some sort of an external dynamic at play to cause different kinds of little reactions. I just remember when I was a kid. Do you guys remember the ant farms by any chance?
Mhm.
My friends who lived next door to me, each one of them got ant farms. And so they were constantly doing things like waiting for the ants to start building their little tunnels and all the rest of that. And then they would do something to obstruct it so that they could watch the ants fix the mess that they made. And I had, one of the brothers was evil. So when the other two guys had black ants, he went outside and he got himself a whole bunch of fire ants so that they could have ant wars. Now, these are kids who are 9 and 10 years old. Can you imagine being so wealthy that you never have to worry about anything, but bored? It's not enough to just have all of that control from a financial standpoint. Never really have control until you can make people do things to each other they wouldn't normally do. So I can't tell if that's the universe saying, Bill, you've got a point there, or Bill, you should stop talking because it's not making any sense to us.
I mean, personally, I think that, when people are busy bickering, then I'm just going to say people in power can pursue much more of their agenda because everybody else is distracted by a quote unquote noise. And so, depending on what that person's agenda is, it moves forward, and I think it's because people are busy thinking of other things and doing other things. And, if you all of a sudden, have a large group of people, let's say, who can't afford food or whatever, they're worried about getting food. They're not really thinking about whether some law down here got passed.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it's a mechanism. One is, you might say, it's a mechanism of power or maintaining control, or just being able to pursue, which is power maybe, to pursue whatever you believe, whatever you believe needs to get done.
Right.
Good and bad. I mean, that's just what I think when you ask why and what is the purpose of it. That's what I think is the purpose of it.
Yeah. It's almost as if, and I can't really say I have no certainty for this, but it sure seems over the last recorded history that I'm aware of that there's always been this need to have a hierarchical structure. The people at the top who are so-called in power, and then everybody else. And it seems like it's that way in most organizations, except there are some that I think are kind of cool, and they're the odd kids, if you will. Have either of you ever been to a Quaker meeting house?
I, I've been to a Quaker meeting house.
And have you sat through one of their so-called, it's not like, they don't follow any particular, I went one time, so that makes me an expert. But what I sat through was a bunch of men sitting in silence. And the only reason for breaking the silence was to have something to share with everyone else. And it really was never about making a point, or trying to curry favor with other people by saying something really brilliant. Quite the opposite. As a matter of fact, making a point or being brilliant was the booby prize. That did not improve the silence. What was your experience, Jan?
Yeah, very similar. And I don't know that I've had other areas, but I think much more unifying, and word unity comes to mind when I think of it.
Yeah.
And probably coherence. Much more like this resonance that happens, and less about any one person being the focus, and that the focus be the group.
Sure.
I do think that I've encountered that in other places. Not many, but I have experienced that without not being in a Quaker meeting house, because I've also not done it many times, but found other places where I think you can feel that sense of unity. But it is, it doesn't, I would just say my experience, it's been rare that I found that. Maybe some depending on where I was at that time and where everybody else was coming from, since it's a group it's almost like I want to say it's a group dynamic, not in the fact that it's like in a negative way.
Right.
It's almost this feeling to me of each individual being added to a greater whole. And that way it's dynamic. So yeah, that's how I think of it, is that it was dynamic in the fact that it was more powerful. Everybody was more powerful together than they were separately.
Which is kind of like how it really is, right?
Absolutely. And there are other circumstances, I think, people who are, and you have to, it almost reminds me of geese in flight, how when they fly in V formation, there is that structure that is very aerodynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got actually a goose story that I became aware of in the early 1990s. And then, maybe one of these days we'll just take the time at the beginning of a recording and read it first, and then just kind of look at the nuggets, that are there. So Austin, let me ask you a question. You're not as jaundiced as I am, having not gone around the sun quite as many times. And I think you still have a tremendous amount of so-called time in front of you, predictably, yes? Although when you said earlier, 100 years ago from now, or something of that nature, when I'm doing whatever, that may not be quite as facetious as it may have sounded to people. We're at a time right now where folks are routinely living to 120, 125 years. And according to Elon Musk, we've got a lot of 140-year-old out there too collecting Social Security. So that gives me hope.
I might have missed the question.
Well, the question is, from your standpoint, where do you go to get energy fed?
To get one more time?
Energy fed. It's a word I just made up, where you go to renew, to be coherent, to resonate, and kind of get rekindled and restarted, if you will.
Where do I go? I don't think that's a very good answer. But to sleep, and if I said I went to sleep, where I go is a very vast answer.
Is that where inspiration comes for you?
You know, no. Well, maybe, perhaps. I think it was Albert Einstein who used to, or maybe it was Benjamin. Anyway, one of the geniuses. He would intentionally go to sleep, to activate different nervous system functions to, generate. But then there's also another genius I ran across. Someone talked about. He claimed that all of his knowing wasn't actually his, or the thoughts weren't his. Which, I mean, you could take approaches to back it with science now, but sticking with answering where do you go to resent, you go everywhere and nowhere.
Well,
How do you ask a different question?
Well, let me ask. All right, so here's a more direct question. How much time do you spend in the company of groups, and how much time do you spend alone?
Probably spend more time alone. You want proportion or actual hour amount?
Probably percentages, if, whatever's comfortable to you that you can relate to. I can tell you, when I was your age, we spent very little time alone. We didn't have the communications means that, that folks do now. We can communicate to people anywhere on the planet instantaneously at this point in time. When I was your age, or what I believe is approximating your age, we had to get on a telephone, and they had to be at the other end of a wire in order for us to communicate with them.
I find it interesting that even though we have such an access to connect with people,
Yeah.
culture almost designed individual or independent achievement, almost like to strive for, you accomplish this without connecting, whether external, internal, or with others.
Yeah.
Once again, ask more questions. Why when we have more ability does it not appear to match?
You would think, but the more people that are talking, the harder it is to get heard or to be heard. Like, as a theory, when you're in a room of silence, the first person to break the silence has the attention of every other single person until they all start having little chats with each other. Now even though it's not loud, their attention is somewhere other than the person who's going to speak next. So to get their attention, you have to do something different or abrupt or noteworthy or worth listening to. And it just seems like that's how our whole communications environment seems to work these days.
I think if we take that same scenario and look at, well, what would you do to, if you want to look at it as counteract, or where's your placement in all this noise going on? Maybe counterintuitive to some, but the more people that would return to that silence and then become coherent in that silence, it affects everybody else. So in my mind, I'm really excited for it. Once again, here's this whole shift thing, because I think that, dare I say, breakdown of language, it's actually, I think more people are opening up to, through other veils. And It's interesting speaking on it because I can't ever know how accurate I am on speaking on it. But what I sense is like these within a dream, within a veil. And the more that return, say, let's just pick a silence point, or silence or coherence. The thing that I think where we pose all these questions and we make noise about, we want to be heard, we strive for connection or independent achievement, or why is this happening? Um, Typical train of thought, of course. I'll end it with my little edit with when you were talking about in the beginning all these questions, these big political and global questions. I thought about Matias de Stefano, him talking about some of the creation designs, and I also thought of a channeling from the creators. You can you can either go to the creators or there's other people that report it, like Brian Scott, where it talks about this is designed this way. All this noise is designed for us. Without it, possibly there wouldn't be a striving forward. There wouldn't be an after.
Yep.
But that's just an approach also. Because I said it before, anything that I say, anybody else says, the closest it can be is a projection of the truth. But I think that's what the joy of that silence is, returning, being counterintuitive. Where do we get to a point where we're not posing questions of, oh, why is this noise sound noisy? Instead, where do we become interested in the questions more than the answers? Because there's plenty of answers. In fact, I think it was Elon Musk that was like, the universe already gave us the answers. What is the question we're asking it?
When you're speaking, the one thing that came to me, because I was just having this conversation with somebody, is I think it's okay to say, like, the question is that, do you spend more of your time alone or with groups? And do you spend more time of your alone and feel okay with the fact that you spend more time alone? Or are you in conflict with the fact that you are who you are? It's like, can I accept the fact that I'm basically a homebody and I like being alone? And that's fine. Sorry, dog calling. Or am I spending my life thinking that oh my gosh, I wish I was like somebody else, or comparing myself to somebody else, or wishing I was a social person and group oriented? And I think that that's where it gets to be like almost where people are denying who they are, their true nature. And so to me, that alone time comes from figuring out, like, where do I resonate? What, where do I feel most at home? Where do I feel like I belong? And all those types of questions. Because I think if none of that happens, it doesn't matter whether you're in a group or you're not in a group, because you're constantly in battle with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great reframe. And, I think that's a big part why I resonate with the two of you right before me. And, some of the groups that I have gotten to a point where I feel more comfortable learning that authenticity, changing, shift. There's that shift word again. What powerful reflection to, yeah, I did. That's not what I took away from my social, but thank you, Jan.
Well, I can tell you this, Tonka's right. This would be a really good time for us to kind of wrap up today. It was, again, an amazing conversation from my perspective. Absolutely exactly what the doctor ordered for me, my friends. I hope you got something really good out of it as well. I think in the meantime, Austin, any thoughts that you have to kind of like maybe put a little bow or a maraschino, whatever, however you say that word, cherry on the top of it?
I'm being called to just go with my current theme in my life, which is laugh more at getting up after you've fallen down. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Most progress does look like falling down and getting up, right? Jan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I also love the conversation today, and I do think it really is. Also said laugh more, and I think it's what I shared at the end, which really isn't any different. Is I think to actually be more with the flow of where you are. I want to say, because in every situation it's going to be different. And it might be called upon, like you might be called upon to not be alone. And can you be okay in that situation where you'd rather, let's say, not be there for some reason or whatever? And can you kind of really be in a flow state, almost trying to find the harmony within the situation, wherever that? And I like harmony because I don't like because not necessarily balance, you know? It's finding the harmony within it, because that to me is more internal.
Pretty great. So I think with that said, I'm going to stand on the strength and power of both of your summary comments and go right straight to our weekly invitation to people. And that is, no matter where you are, you've got other people in your life that are important to you. Would you please, during this week, reach out to folks, not just one, maybe more, and let them know how important they are to you in your world, how your world works because they're there. And that if they have ever had a thought, or they ever do have a thought, or need something, they can reach out to you and you will be there. And if you can't provide it, perhaps you can help them find someone who can. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you so much to you, Austin, and to you, Jan, for another really great conversation. I kind of, I use the metaphor of jumping out of an airplane and figuring out how we're going to, invent a parachute on the way down. And sometimes we don't get a parachute. Sometimes the ground comes rather abruptly. But I think in the meantime, just thank you both for another great week.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Austin.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And my other invitation to you is to go out and live your best life and then come back and tell me all about it. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.